Welcome everyone. Welcome to this new session about the SafeX3 debugger. So this new feature, which is available since a few weeks now, is very helpful. So we are going to show you how it works, what are the prerequisites, and to demo it as well. So here is the agenda for this session. We'll start with the prerequisites, how to set it up, how to activate it, then a little demo, and at the very end we'll have a question and answer session. So far, everyone will be muted meanwhile. So, the prerequisites. First of all, we are talking here about version 6 minimum. The debugger is not available for version 5 or below. So since version 6, we need to be in 6.4 platform, which means we need the engine number 216 minimum, and we recommend to use the engine 219 or more, which will be released later in April or May. We don't know yet exactly, but starting with the 216, it's working. You need to be on patch 17 because you have two maintenances that are changing new parameters, tables, etc. We'll see a little bit more in details later what are all this. You need to update your X3 Studio plugin to the version 1.2.4. We have a version 1.2.5 which will be released soon. Normally, I don't know exactly when, but well, Eric should release it very soon. And you need to have an X3 client from version 1.0.4. Once you have this installed, we can start to make the debugger work. So, how to set it up? First, before even starting, be aware that you have the online help for Eclipse embedded inside the SafeX3 Studio plugin, which means that every question that you have, try first to look into the Eclipse help and see if something can help you first. There's a big chance that you find your answer here. So, first, when you set up the debugger module of Eclipse, you need to set up what we call a perspective. Just as a reminder, a perspective is a set of windows, and you can define several perspectives. For example, you have a Java perspective, you have an X3 Studio perspective, and you have a debugger perspective. So in order for Eclipse to trigger the debugger perspective, you need to set it up. So if you go to the preferences of Eclipse, into window preferences, you look for the keyword perspective, and you will see that in the run debug section, perspectives, you will have here two options to set up. You need to set it up to always or prompt, but do not put never. By doing so, you are telling Eclipse, when it's detecting a debugging phase, to launch automatically the debugger perspective, or eventually to ask you if you want to launch it. You can see that here you will set up a perspective for an X3 file and for an X3 project. If I show you on my own installation, I go to Windows, Preferences, Perspectives. For my X3 file, I'm always prompt, X3 project, always prompt. Next step is to set up inside X3 the debugger with all the parameters that we have. So we have 3 parameters to set up, and those 3 new parameters are embedded in the patch 17. So two ways of doing it. Directly through X3. If you go to the user parameters, per user into the dev section, you have here to set up the Eclipse debugger to yes. So the apply dbg, it means yes, I want to activate the debugger. You have eventually the debugger trace. This will allow you to actually trace the debugger in a trace file. This is only for support issues, if you need to send this to R&D, etc. Then here we have apply Mac, which means machines where Eclipse is running. Because with Eclipse now, you can set up any remote machines as the debugging machine. So here, set up the name of the machine. We have then the port that the debugger will use. By default, the port is 10,000. Be careful here, we may have a potential conflict with Sage Search. Sage Search is also using by default port 10,000 and more, it's using from port 10,000 to 10,100. So be aware of this if you want to avoid compliance issues. And we still have the first iEclipse parameter, which allow you to use the Eclipse editor. This is when you connect directly to X3. You can also do it directly when you're connecting to your project in Eclipse. So in Eclipse, you have an icon which looks like this. If you click on it, you will see the same parameters. So you can select them, enter the data, press OK, and you have set up for the user connected with your project the same parameters. Just to show you my own installation. Here I'm in Eclipse. I have here my icon. And here I can see my parameters. I'm saying that I'm using the debugger. I've put the name of the machine that is currently debugging and the port. Here, this is the parameters we are talking about. So, iEclipse to enable tunneling to Eclipse if you open a process. Enable Eclipse debugger, define the host machine, and the port. Again, be careful with Sage Search. So, about the processes. For the debugger, you have 3 new processes, ADX files. You have aecli RDV, which manages what we call a rendezvous, which means it's launching an X3 session based on a rendezvous management. So you can run a process, debug a process, or attach to a process. We'll see those 3 later. Then you have the process debugger, which is the standard process for debugging. Finally, you have wmaxddbg, which is the debugger process in Eclipse. So, to activate your debugger, you have different choices. First one is to do the old way, which means put a dbg AFF. Because you have activated Eclipse debugger and X3 knows which machine is connected, as soon as you encounter the dbg AFF, it will be able to trigger Eclipse directly. We can also use breakpoints. This is something very, very interesting for us, the people that know the standard debugger. This was a big limitation. So we have standard line breakpoints. You can enable a breakpoint by double-clicking in margin, press shortcut Ctrl-Shift-B, or just go to the menu Run and toggle breakpoint. So for example, if I'm here, I have my dbgff. If I want to stop earlier, I can double click. Here is my breakpoint. I can add and remove them. Or I can run and add different breakpoints here. So this one is a line breakpoint. We also have what we call a conditional breakpoint. This will allow you to, for example, put a breakpoint on the value of a variable. So if I go to my debugger view, I have here the breakpoint view. So I can add a conditional breakpoint. For example, I can say my counter equals 2. If I do that, X3 will stop as soon as the variable my counter equals 2. I can set up several breakpoints. I can combine all types of breakpoints. I can disable or enable breakpoints. I also have the on-error breakpoints. This allows you, when you know the type of error, to catch this error, in fact. So, same way, here, error breakpoints. Those errors are provided, it's standard X3 errors. So you have, for example, a comma is missing, illegal character, etc. So in fact, all the errors that X3 can throw are potentially there. So you can try to catch it and do a specific process when you catch it. You can manage your exceptions like this. Finally, we have something interesting, which is what we call the watch point, a breakpoint on value change. For example, when you select, let's select this variable, my counter, you can right-click directly on it. Where have it? This one here. In the Run menu, you can, of course, handle all your standard breakpoint, and here, toggle a watch point. If you toggle a watch point, you put the name of the variable, and as soon as your variable is changing its value, you will trigger the debugger. Very useful for tracking the change on one single item. So, another choice now to activate the debugger is to attach the debugger process to an existing X3 session. Here, it's something very, very interesting, which will allow you to put a debugger session on an interactive task, of course, but also on a batch task or on a web services session, etc. When you are here on Eclipse, you have here this new icon attached to process and debug. So when you click on it, well, I don't have any session, but I will open one. If I open one, you will see your session here. You can select one, press attach, and then the debugger will be launched on this session automatically. So, the different views available in debug mode, in the debug perspective. You have first the standard views from the debug group. You can see them here on the right side. So you have the breakpoints view to manage your breakpoints. You have the debug view, which is in fact the stack, which means you can see the stack of processes and see exactly what are the different levels of processes. You have the expressions. We'll see in details what it is, but it's allowing you to query any kind of expression. It could be just a variable, a table, an array. Everything can be valued, looking into the value of it in expression. We have the variable view. Variable view will automatically display the variables that are present in your process and its values as well. Then you have a Safix3 Studio debug group views. You have the standard views we had in the standard debugger, like the mask, to see all the masks open and their abbreviation, the list of processes, and the list of tables. Finally, you have the dynamic language group view, which allows you to have the interactive console. The interactive console is exactly the same as a standard console, a calculator, but it allows you to use it at the exact moment of the debugging. So here you have the memory, the mask for the list of masks with name, abbreviation, etc. Same thing for tables. In this variables view, you will have the list of variables that you have open and their values. You have the list of processes open, eventually, of course, sequential files. Here, the expressions that you are inquiring, the interactive console, and finally, the variables. So, about a breakpoint. This view will allow you, like we've seen, to manage your breakpoints, which means add, delete, modify, display, or enable, disable. Be careful, in the view you can only manage conditional breakpoints and error breakpoints. If you want to go what's called a watch point, you need to select the variable and then go to the run menu and toggle a watch point. The standard view debug is the one we have here on the left-hand side. You can see the calling stack. So here we have 3 processes, but you can see all the processes that have been called and see if, where you are standing exactly. The expression view. So, of course, this allows you to manage your expressions. You can select a variable, just a letter, a table, an array. Everything is almost possible here. Be very careful with this expression view. It's very useful, but every time you add a new expression, you're making a call to the runtime to evaluate your expression. Which means if you have, I don't know, 3 tables, 2 arrays, and 4 mask screens, it's going to take a very, very long time for Eclipse to evaluate everything because it's making a runtime call every time. So use this with care and try to use only the one you need. The variables. So here, for example, you can see I have 2 variables in my process, debug2. I have one passed by parameter code, which is here with its value, and one I've created a local variable label. Here you only see variables, only local variables. Something very, very interesting as well is that you can modify the values of this variable. So here, if I right click, I will be able to change the value of this variable. You still have access to the variable classes. So you can display all the classes, how many symbols you have, etc. Be careful because when you are here, a class like this can also be evaluated in the expression view, which means I can ask Eclipse to give me all the content of the class S and to evaluate it. all the contents of the class V, which is a global variable, and evaluate it. S for system, C, counter, etc. So for example, if I give the class V to evaluate, it's going to do at least something like 900 calls to evaluate all the variables. So be careful, it's going to degrade your performance if you do that. You also have a local, a trace like we can have in the old debugger. So you're going to write all the code that is executed locally or on the server. It's up to you. You can do both. Of course, if you do it locally, it means that you're going to have more traffic, so it's going to be less performant. But still, it's interesting because you can have it, copy, paste it, etc. Here we are having the original views from the standard debuggers. So the memory, to see how much memory we are using, different classes, the processes that are used, list of masks, list of sequential files, list of tables. About the interactive console, it allows you to evaluate a little bit like the expression view, of course, in the context of the debugged process. And it's allowing you in the coming version to assign values to variables. Here, for example, you can see that JUser is Erbu, and we can here force Toto to be in JUser. And if we inquire, we will have Mr. JUser, which is Mr. Toto. What you need to know about performances. You have lots of views displayed and visible, which make a lot of data that are transiting between your Eclipse and the X3 server. The more you have, the less performant it will be. So be very careful with what you evaluate, especially when we are talking about multi-level data, arrays, tables, screens, etc. This can potentially crash your session if you have too much data. About the conditional breakpoint and the watch point. They are evaluated by the engine for each instructions, which means making an engine call every time we have this kind of breakpoint. So of course it's less performant. So if we combine all those issues, we need to be very careful what we are doing with it, because it's very easy to evaluate 2 screens, 2 tables, 3 arrays. So we need to be careful of the amount of data we want to evaluate. Here, when we talk about breakpoints, we are talking local breakpoints to Eclipse, which means I'm not going to see it in the standard debugger at all. It's only local to Eclipse and to my project I have opened. Then, when you launch the debugger from Eclipse, it will systematically force the machine in the port of the current host workstation. So, let's do a little demonstration. I go back here on my view. So I have 2 projects opened, a demo project and my X3 project. I'm linked to my X3 reference folder and to my demo folder. I have created a small program just to show you how it works. I have several. So here I can just compile and run this program, and the debugger will be launched because I have a DBG AFF here. So if I try, Eclipse is launching a session. Some error I will fix later. So here you can see that nothing happened in my X3 session, but on Eclipse, I've automatically switched to the debug perspective, sorry. So here you can see the debug view with the calling stack. You can see that in the variable view, I'm having my local variables that I've declared with their values. You can see that here I've declared an array of char and an array of char with 2 dimensions. So far it's empty. And you can also see on a multi-dimension array that you can also see the result of a multi-dimension. So be careful when you are playing with this with 2, 3, eventually 4. Not sure if someone uses it, but be aware of it. Here I have my breakpoints. I have my trace if I ask for it. The memory I'm using. The eventual masks that are opened. The tables. The variable classes with number of symbols. The processes that are open. The sequential files. Here, if I want to enter an expression, for example, I can enter the variable my counter here. I can right-click, watch. Automatically, it's added to my expression view. Here I have my interactive console, so I can ask for any kind of information here. I can ask for guser. I can ask for my counter. Because here I'm in the context of the debug process, I can mix the expression and some global variables that are available every time. So if I go back to my view debug here, I have several options. Here I can resume, which means I'm stopping the debug mode and I let the process continue. Here I can terminate it. I can step into, which means I'm going to go into every details. I can step over if I don't want to go into a go sub, for example, or a subprog. I can step return, which means if I'm stuck inside a go sub that is lasting for hours, if I click here, I will exit this go sub and go to the line right after it. So, in this context, let's try to step into. You can see that the line that is colored, that is here, with the evaluation of every data. So, if I continue, here I'm going to put a value in my variable myChar array. I'm going to put cell and the number of my counter. It's okay, and you can see that now I have my value here. I can change this value if I want, like this here. And I can put it back to 0. If I go a little bit further, just to show you the evaluation of a multi-dimensional array, if I close my char and I look to my char array 2, you can see that here I have some values cell 00, cell 01 inside the second dimension of my char array. So now you can see that I have my breakpoint that is going to stop me if my counter equals 2. So if I resume, then X3, the debugger stops again, because now you can see that my counter equals 2. So my breakpoint worked. If you want to trigger another kind of breakpoints, I'm not going to have errors here, but I can toggle a watch point, which is equivalent. Oh, okay. Something we need eventually to fix in the coming versions. Okay, anyway. Now let's try to do the same, see what happens for classes like mask and tables. So if I compile and run, you can see that on the right-hand side, I need to remove my watch point. Breakpoint, watch point, delete. So my debugger is now enabled, is actually here. On the variables, I have none because I'm only opening a file. So I'm looking to my table. It's open. So I can evaluate my expression. So I remove the old one. I select my table here. And then you can see that I have 131 objects evaluated. And I have the values for each. Be careful as you are directly taking the tables. If we talk about local menus, one that I know, ITM staff, for example, here, I don't have directly the text linked to it. I only have the local menu value. But nothing prevents me for taking this local menu number and try eventually to interrogate it later on in the console. But be aware of it. We don't have more information than this on local menus. Okay, so I think it's pretty much all for the demo. I can't really show you a batch session or web service session because I'm using a test engine, so it's not going to work. But know that it works. I've tested it. So it's really, really a pretty tool that we have now, and I hope that you will enjoy it. We will now go through the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We can use also the chat box if you want, and we are going to maybe record the questions as well because it could be interesting. So do we have any questions?
Hey Bruno, this is Bob.
Yes, Bob?
I have a question. So before in the client, you needed to set your Eclipse installation directory and workspace.
Yes.
Is that still a requirement?
Yes. But not for debugging. This is just for the studio itself. Debugging is just one feature of the plugin studio.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
We have another question?
Yeah, hi Bruno, this is Drew from North America, Pittsburgh. I noticed when using breakpoints and not putting a dbg-AFF statement in there, that I would have to go up to the attached to process before it would actually hit one of the breakpoints. Is there a better way or some way to link the current X3 session to Eclipse? Is it best to start out the X3 session from Eclipse? Is that what automatically creates a link, or how do you typically do it? You know, really, I'm trying to get away from using the DBG AFF in the cases where, like, I'm just testing something, or I want to step through something, but I don't want to go, you know, open up or modify existing standard code, like in GX3 APP, where we go change something, and then we get a workflow saying, hey, you changed this, you need to contact this manager or whatever. Really trying to get away or around setting off these flags if we're just trying to debug something. Does that make sense?
I see what you mean. The thing is, when you attach a process, you will start debugging it immediately.
Right.
So you really need, in fact, we still have some limitations. You really need to define what you want to debug. So, for example, if you have a batch task, if you attach your process to a batch task, you will launch the debugger on what it's actually processing. If you put a breakpoint, it will stop at the breakpoint you have asked. So maybe one thing could be, if you already know in advance the error that you have, to catch the error. But if you just want to test if it works, just launch the process without dbg-AFF. But we can't really track it through the debugger because there is too much code to track when you do that in standard. I don't know if if my answer is okay, Drew.
I didn't really follow what you were saying. So you're saying that basically we need to put a dbg-AFF statement in there to get the link between the X3 session and Eclipse?
Normally, if you have a breakpoint, it should be triggered. A breakpoint on a variable, what we call a watch point, a breakpoint on an error, if you catch an exception.
But not if we just put a breakpoint on that specific line. Is
exactly.
That what you're saying? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I follow. Okay.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, this is Peter from Germany. Is it possible to show us how we can attach the process? You said that you might show us.
Of course.
Just to complete and follow up on those questions that the guys asked from America.
I'm sorry, Theodore, I'm not hearing you very well. It seems very, very far.
Can you hear me now better?
No. Hello, Theodore?
Can you hear me better now?
Not really, but okay, we'll work this through.
Okay, my question is if you can show us how to attach to a process.
Yes. So here you can see I have my X3 session. I have Eclipse here. I'm not in debug mode, so I'll go back to my process. And I press here the icon. And you have here the list of sessions that are open on the server you are connected to. You can see every type of session, primary, web services, batch, etc. So you just select the session, and then you press attached. It's asking you if you are sure if you want to attach it. And then automatically you go into debugger mode. And everything you will do on this session will be debugged. So here I don't have anything, but if you are doing something, it's going to show you. Here, for example, I've pressed F7 to launch the shortcut for functions. So here, it's showing you, well, I don't have the source code of iEclipse, iEclipse RDV, but it's in there. And if I continue, it's going to do it. So when you attached, you will debug what is currently happening. You will retrieve what is actually performed on a session. For example, if you are stuck in a loop, you will be in this loop and you can unlock it. If you generate documentation, you will see exactly what it's currently generating. You can do it like this.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Do we have another question?
Hello, this is Ulrike. I have one more question. You told us you can attach each session, so you can also attach to a batch session. And for example, the accounting batch, because as I know, I couldn't do this before with the old debugger.
Yes.
True?
Yes.
Oh, that's fine.
In fact, any kind of thing that were not possible because we're using the same technology, now we can do it. For the people that knew it, we still have a Java debugger that worked a little bit the same. It was made outside of X3, made for debugging web sessions. It's exactly the same thing, and plus, as you can tell what is the debugging machine, you can debug remotely. So you have the debuggy and you have the debugger. So you can debug a client remotely like this, or a colleague, or if you have network access between the debugging machine and the debuggy, then you can work that way.
That's good news.
Do we have another question? Is it okay for everyone? Seems so? Okay, so we are going to stop. The PowerPoint, I'm going to send it to you right after this. There's a big chance that this PowerPoint will be updated later. I'm going to make a training, real training material out of it with some exercises, etc. If you have any questions, you can ask me. You can ask your team in your contact. Normally, it should be okay. Ask maybe as soon as you can for the runtime 219, because it's really there that you are starting to have all the functionalities working. The runtime 216, it's really to start with, like not a degraded mode, but almost. So thank you everyone for paying attention, for your question. And again, do not hesitate to contact me if you need anything. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you,
Bruno.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.